tonight I want to take some time. We're going to interview some pretty special people in our church, and it's been several months of our church family walking through this family with a difficult situation that they've walked through, and we're actually going to continue it even on going into this weekend into Easter. And it's Doug and Carri Hall, and Doug was diagnosed back in July of last year with leukemia. And I remember several times, you may or may not remember this, that we prayed for Doug in here on a Wednesday night. I don't know if you remember one time I had everybody in the whole room face east because he was at OU Medical, and I had all of us reach our hands in that direction and pray for him. I don't know if you remember some of that, but we've walked through them with this as a church, and going through chemo and going through a bone marrow transplant. And there's good news, and I'm not going to tell you all of it because this is a good thing, but I think it'll minister to all of us tonight to hear more of their story of what God has walked them through. So will you help me in welcoming Doug and Carri Hall to the stage? Come on up here, guys. Awesome. They don't ever stand up for me like that, man.
I thought if I didn't wear this, you guys wouldn't recognize me.
Yeah, I was like, he showed up tonight in a blazer jacket, and I was like, dude, what, you trying to make me look bad? Like, I'm in a T-shirt. Do you like his shirt? Look at his T-shirt. It says, "Karate kick cancer in the face." It's pretty good. I like that. Well, I don't know where to start with this. Doug and I, it's funny, we were back in the green room talking a little bit ago, and we got to reminiscing about the first time he and I really met and started talking, and he started throwing out some dates, and he said, "No, I sent you an email," and so I actually pulled out my computer and went back and started looking at some of these emails, and we sat there and reminisced for a few minutes about the very first time we ever met. And I want Doug at some point to get into this of what he was wrestling with, just even in his faith before he ever tackled leukemia, and kind of process through some of that. But before we ever get to any of that, some of you may have no idea who these people are. So why don't you just take a minute and just kind of introduce yourselves?
Well, as Pastor said, our names are Doug and Carri Hall. Unlike the TV show King of Queens, we are not Doug and Carri Heffernan, although we are big fans of the show. We actually just celebrated 28 years together on St. Patrick's Day. We're a blended family. For those of you that have been in our Equip class, we teach a class on marriage on the rock. We were both married before, but Carri will not let me tell the story of how we met because I mess it up really bad. But I have a child from my first marriage named Sean. He's 30. He has 3 kids, and then Carri and I have 2 together. Ian is 27, and Ems will be 20 in May. So we have 3 kids and 3 grandkids.
Nice.
Thank you.
Did he get all that right, Carri, or do you need to correct him on anything?
No, that's okay.
You
It's
have to
okay,
use your
good.
microphone.
All right.
No, so far he's
Okay, because the woman will always correct because they know the
Yeah,
facts.
It was first time I told the story of how we met and our relationship kind of budded in our Equip class. It was a pretty bad train wreck, so she banned me from that one. But we've been at Victory, goodness, 16 years.
Wow.
So we've been around a while. Served about 10 years in kids ministry. I work for PepsiCo for a living. You guys have probably seen some of my guitars up on stage. I build custom electric guitars to keep myself from eating paint chips. It kind of helps keep me sane. So tell something about yourself, Hottie.
Well, I work for a CPA, so a lot of you know what CPAs do this time of year, so you're probably wondering why I'm up here. But fortunately, when I took the job, I said, I don't like taxes, I don't like to do taxes, I don't like to talk about taxes. If that's what you need me to do, I'm not your person. Believe it or not, I got the job.
Wow. It's like working for a bakery and saying, "I hate bread."
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, again, a lot of us as your church family know the situation you guys walked through, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't kind of start just by telling everybody the dates, the times, when all this played out. And really, it's kind of cool because you're getting a sneak peek into Easter, because my message on Sunday is kind of going to be gift wrapped around the miracle of what they've walked through, and this whole idea of the day death died, that he was diagnosed with this, 3 to 6 months to live diagnosis, and then they kind of came to this point where they could stand boldly and say, death has died because we are not dying. This is not happening. And so it's really a modern day miracle that happened right under our noses. And so just kind of walk through that process of diagnosis and all of those things, however you want to tell that story.
It all started the last week of June of last year, and I was absolutely asymptomatic. We were living life. And the last week of June, for those of you that live in the city, we have big trash day. And we were cleaning up our backyard. We had done some work in the back, and I had a big piece of concrete back there, and we were loading it up into a wheelbarrow. And the wheelbarrow tipped over, and the concrete hit me against the leg, and I was 52 years old at the time. Noticed a big bruise on my calf the next day, and I thought, you're 52, you're getting older, your skin's getting a little thinner, no big deal. Then over the course of the next week or so, I noticed these bruises just begin to appear in various places on my body, my arms, my stomach, and they were, I'm a guy, so I bump into things. Like I said, I build guitars, so I'm always doing something with my hands or in the shop. So for me to have a bruise was not unusual, but the bruises that I was having were not relative to what was going on. Like if I would bump something, these bruises were very dark, very purple, had knots in them, and again, being the guy that I was, I told her, let's give this a week. I'm not one that just runs to the doctor every time I get the sniffles. I guess I do now, but I didn't back then. So over the course of the next week to 10 days, things didn't get any better. And then the Wednesday night, it probably was July 5th. It was Wednesday evening. I was sitting in my chair. I reached back to grab a blanket, and I scraped my arm on the bottom of the table that's next to my chair. And instead of leaving a little raised whelp, I sat there and watched the blood begin to pool up under my skin. Being the intelligent person that I am, I looked at her and said, something's not right. And so we had lunch with my brothers and their wives that Saturday, and my oldest brother, hey Dan, he and I we've been having lunch. His wife's name's Mary Ann, so Carri and I and Dennis and Mary Ann have been having lunch together for about a couple of years. So I told Dan, I said, Bubba, something's not right. I need you guys to pray with us. And so she made an appointment, which she had already made up her mind she was going to do anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. He was going to the doctor.
But she made an appointment for me on Monday, July 10th. July 11th, went to the doctor that morning, and he ordered a full CBC with diff, for those of you that know anything about that type of stuff. It's a full blood panel. And so I went and had that done, and at the time he thought it was my heart. And I have an uncle who I'm very close to that has had, I think, six stents put in. So I just kind of went, it's a stent. They'll do it. I'll be back to work in a couple of weeks. I know, again, a guy thing, right? So I called her and said, hey, here's what the doctor said. Went and had the thing done, and the doctor had said, I want to hook you up with a cardiologist, and we're going to run a stress test. So her and M were at the eye doctor. Well, when they got home from the eye doctor, I was mowing the yard.
He was in trouble. He was in a lot of trouble. I didn't want him to do a self-stress test. I wanted it to be hospital.
So if you guys haven't figured out, I spend a lot of time in timeouts, so it wasn't unusual. But anyway, 1:30 that afternoon, the phone rang, and it was the doctor's office. And the nurse was kind of beating around the bush. And I said, Ashley, we don't play that way in this house. Just tell me what's going on. And she said, well, the doctor thinks that you have leukemia. He thinks that it's ALL, which is acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So I hung up the phone. And after the initial, well, I won't tell you what my initial thought was because we're a church, but I walked in and I told Carri. I was in what we call my south office. I was in our formal dining room that we've converted to my office, and she was in the kitchen at the table working. And I walked in and said, doctor said I have leukemia. And at that point, we just said, you have to have a team, I have to have a team, and we have to have a team together. We cannot fight this fight on our own.
Yeah.
And I was raised in church. I mean, literally grew up sleeping under the pews. You guys all have to forgive me. I've got to get a drink. I've got a weird side effect of chemo is you get cotton mouth, and it's just hit me in the last couple of weeks, so forgive me. Which is really good if you're trying to stay hydrated. But I grew up in church. Kind of grew up in a very legalistic type environment. My biological father got mesothelioma when I was 6. I debated on whether I was going to share this or not, but I will. My most vivid memory that I had of my father was hiding under the bed to get away from him. I was terrified of my father. And so he was diagnosed with mesothelioma when I was 6. The Lord healed him miraculously on Thanksgiving Day of that year. And then he traveled around and gave his testimony for a while at churches. And then he went in for, I believe it was an appendectomy, and all of those cancer cells were still in his stomach. And somebody in the church made this statement to him, well, it must not have been God's will to heal you. And it wasn't a matter of months before my father died. And I've always been the curious, creative, troublemaking knucklehead of the family. And I ask a lot of questions. And, one of the questions I asked was why? And the response that was given to me was, well, I guess God needed your dad more than you did. And so, I mean, you can imagine that. With that kind of a memory of your father and that kind of a statement, I really struggled to understand what a relationship with God was supposed to be like. And being in a very works-oriented environment, it was try like crazy. I got saved every year at church camp. That was awesome. I probably filled out 10,000 salvation cards in my life.
Better safe than sorry, right?
That's right. Live like the devil Monday through Friday, get saved on Sunday. That was my life for a lot of years. So, that's kind of what I grew up with as my image of God. And then starting in about 2012, I didn't know what it was at the time. Didn't understand what it was, I'll put it that way. But God really began to, I'll use the word annoy because it's really what it was, but the Holy Spirit really began to come after me. And in July 13th in 2013, Carri and I loaded up and drove to Amarillo to Trinity Church. Drove 5 hours to go to church because I needed something different. And I won't go into all of the details of that, but it was really kind of the beginning of a mark of what our journey would be. And so back to the story, going at the table, I just, God had really begun to do some things in our heart and in our marriage. And I just told her, I said, honey, we have to have something to fight with. And the two scriptures that we've had from the beginning, one of them is in Proverbs 3:8. And Jackie, did they?
Yeah, they got it. It's up.
Okay. Proverbs 3:8, it says, that's in the Bible in basic English. It says, it will give strength to your flesh and new life to your bones. Well, leukemia is a disease of the bone marrow. And the amplified version of it says it will be health to your body, your marrow, your nerves, your sinews, your muscles, all of your inner parts, and refreshment, physical well-being to your bones. So that was one of our fight scriptures. And then we went to Psalms 118:17 in the King James. It says, I will not die, but I will live and declare the works of my God.
That's good. That's good.
And I wouldn't say that it was anything of great faith or anything like that, would you? I think it was just survival.
Yeah, it was just kind of the first thing that we thought of. So it just felt natural. It just felt like the right thing to do. So we just went with that.
Carri, tell us about, so many times when somebody's going through a situation, all of the attention is put on the person who's been diagnosed, but the family has to walk through it just as much. And I would shy of saying it's worse, but in a lot of the ways it's at least equal, because you're having to, when he's in the hospital for 40-some days, you're having to keep things together at home with kids and bills and everything else, plus be at the hospital to serve. So going back to that day that Doug walked into that room and they said it's leukemia, like what kind of emotion, what were you feeling, what were you sensing in that moment? Like,
Well, my first thought was, he better do what the doctors tell him to do. He's going to follow through. He's going to do what they say.
You know Doug too well.
Yes, and that kind of goes back to some of my other comments I already made. But I knew in my heart that God had something for us and for him, and it wasn't done. And so just like the song we sang earlier, nothing was going to take that away.
Yeah.
So I knew, even though I was scared and I didn't know what to do, but I knew that leukemia wasn't going to be the end. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know how we were going to do it, but I knew that we would. And then, we had a community of people, our family, our friends, that just surrounded us and gave us what we needed when we needed. Sometimes it was a meal, sometimes it was a text or just a hug. Sometimes we think of these things that we do, they're nothing, they don't mean anything. When you send somebody a text, you don't know. Sometimes that's exactly what somebody needs to get them through that day. You have no idea what's going on that day, but it's exactly what will get them through it. So when you feel that you need to do it and you think, God, this is stupid, I don't know why I'm doing it, do it anyway.
Right. That's good. So processing through everything you guys have done and the journey, maybe kind of update people where you are now. Take them through the journey, what you had to do, and what's the current situation, what's the current diagnosis, and then I'll kind of want to backpedal and then turn to the people in the room who might be going through their own battle of maybe it's not leukemia, but it's some sort of pain, it's some sort of issue, and then walk back through what advice would you give? So kind of give us an update on where you're at now, I guess.
Well, we went through 2 rounds of what's called induction. When we went in, diagnosis day, July 11th, we got to the hospital at 5 o'clock. A normal white blood cell count for a normal person, whatever that may happen to be, is between 4,000 and 11,000 when they did my labs at the hospital, my white blood cell count was 237,000. So, and a normal platelet count, 140 to 440,000. Is that right, doctor?
Looking at the doctor.
And mine were 6,000.
Wow.
So your platelets are what help with your blood clotting. So I had spent the entire weekend before in the shop working around saws, joiners, routers.
Chisels.
Had I cut myself, I probably would have bled to death, so it was just God's grace. But so we did 2 rounds of induction. When they did my first bone marrow biopsy on July 12th, my bone marrow was 97% leukemia and blast cells.
Wow.
So I had 3% of my marrow that was actually doing what it needed to do. August 11th, Dr. Sherry Jones walked into the room and told us that I was in remission. And we were excited. We thought, okay, cool, that means we're done. Well, what we've learned 7.5 months later is that was the starting point.
Wow.
We went through all of the chemotherapy just to get my body to a point where they could begin to do what they needed to do. And so I spent 44 days in the hospital, admitted July 11th, got discharged August 23rd, celebrated my 53rd birthday in the hospital, had a picnic at the gazebo. Then we did 2 rounds of what's called consolidation. So as is my diagnosis, I would have to go back to the hospital. Think of it as an oil change for your car, okay? So induction was what got me in remission. The consolidation was kind of what kept everything at check. But from the beginning, they would talk about how aggressive that this was. AML is a particularly aggressive type of leukemia, and I carried a DNA mutation called FLT3, which about 30% of the cases also have that, which makes AML that much more aggressive. So they began to talk about bone marrow transplant from the beginning. And to have a bone marrow transplant, you have to have a bone marrow donor. And so we found out that, the odds are about 25% of having a sibling that would match. I have 2 older brothers, Dennis and Jim. So Dennis, we got his results back first. Dennis came back as a 9. So we're like, yes, awesome. And Jim was doing some traveling. He's a pastor at Gateway down in Dallas, and they had some stuff going on with the church. And so in the meantime, they began to look in the marrow registry, and we had 900 other unrelated donors. So we went, okay, that's cool. And then we got Jim's test results back, and Jim was a 10 out of 10. So bone marrow transplant wasn't even a thought until the late 50s, early 60s. I was born in 1964. So before I was ever born, God started men doing the research to find a cure for what I would be diagnosed with 52 years later. Mm-hmm. And so we went through 2 rounds of consolidation. I admitted to the hospital December 7th of last year, which was the same day that Jim came up and they did his bone marrow harvest, which was done by the doctor who started the transplant clinic in Oklahoma. There's so many things in this, and I'm not one of these people, for those of you that know me. I'm not the guy that says God gave me the parking spot, and if you are, cool, God bless you. I'm just by my wiring, I tend to be, and maybe it's because I grew up in church, I don't know why, but I tend to be a little more skeptical, a little more cynical by nature. But there have been so many markers on this journey that, I mean, when we told some of the nurses that we had 900 unrelated matched donors, they're like, what? Most people are lucky if they have 2 or 3 and have to go with an 8 or a 9. You guys have 900? Like, yeah, that's good, right? And they're like, no, you don't get this. So the fact that God had all of this laid out, and it has all been what we found about him during this journey, is the grace that we wanted for the season that we were in never came before we got there.
That's good. That's really good. I don't say that again because I don't think they got that.
The grace that we needed for what we were getting ready to step into was never there before we stepped into it. It was always there when we stepped into it.
Good. It's really good.
And you know, I was undecided about bone marrow transplant. I truly was. And we sought a lot of counsel, Pastor John, Pastor Rich, our family, our friends. We talked to so many people. I believe it's in Proverbs 11 that it says, in the multitude of counselors there is safety. Mm-hmm. And we met with Dr. Yen about transplant the day we were coming home. I told her, I said, I need you to be on. You remember that? We were driving in front of the on-queue down at 119th in Portland. I remember this vividly. I said, I need you to tell me your heart. I don't want you to tell me what you think I want to hear. I need to know your heart in this. And she gave me her response, and I was still undecided. And we were sitting over dinner that night, and it's a very private moment. I won't go into the details, but when I made the decision, she ultimately said, this decision is yours. And when I made the decision to go ahead with bone marrow transplant, it was like the peace of God, like a blanket, just wrapped around me.
So I want both of you to answer this question, and there's two questions. One of them I think you'll answer together, but the first one I want you to answer is, what has this process done for your marriage? Doug, you answer first, and then you answer after him.
Having been divorced before and having been raised in the environment that my mom got remarried when I was 14 and a half. I just didn't have a really good view of what marriage was like. I'll put it that way. And I think at times we stayed married just to see who could outlast the other one, honestly. I honestly do. I think it was out of a spite at times, just say, like an MMA fight.
I can outlast you.
That's right. See who's going to tap out first. But what it has done for me is established a level of trust that I have never had with another human being in my life. To know that I can literally trust her with my life, because she's proved that for the last 8.5 months.
Yeah, it's good.
I would agree with Doug. I think it's, I know we were close before, and when you get married, you say that it's for better, for worse, rich or poor, sickness and in health, and you mean it at the time.
Right.
But it's different when you get there and you're living it. And I always felt close to Doug before, but just going through this, it's like, it's a different kind of close, and it's just brought us a lot closer together. And that, exactly like you said, that I can trust him with anything and everything. I can tell him whatever I need to tell him, what I want to tell him, and he's always going to be there.
Yeah. So what about your relationship with God? I know you and I have met, and I've seen the raw parts of Doug, and
you have.
And before leukemia and after, and I've seen you in your most vulnerable moments, and I've seen you in your highest of faith, and I've seen you in your lowest of faith. and you've made some really, really strong statements, good statements. You've said bad statements too, but really strong, good statements that are truly inspiring to me about your walk with God and what this has done. And hopefully some of those come out as you answer, and I think they will. But like, what has it done in your relationship with God?
This has been a journey of trust for me. I think with my father dying when he did, I learned very early how to wear a mask and be self-sufficient. I learned how to have on my church face around the people that I needed to, and I learned to not have that on, I'll just say it that way, around the people that were my friends. Weren't really my friends, but like I said, in 2013, when we drove to Amarillo, it's like God just began to prepare some things for us. And when you're stuck in a hospital room for 86 days out of 25 and a half weeks, and you do a lot of time with doctors and cancer centers and labs and everything, you learn to wait. And what this has taught me, one of the things that I used to pray, I don't know where it is, I think it's in Psalms, but it says that he will be a father to the fatherless. And that was the one thing that was a missing piece for me. I never felt like I had a father in my life. I mean, my stepdad tried, but when him and my mom got married, they didn't have any kids. He didn't have any kids. I was 14 and a half. I was already playing the guitar in a heavy metal band. I mean, I'd already made up my mind that I wasn't going to accept anything yet. It wasn't any fault of his own. But over the course of the last 8.5 months, God has spoken to me in the voice of a father that I've never, there's been times that he's corrected me, but it didn't produce fear. It was like having the voice of a father correct and try and say, son, this is how you're better. But I would say it's been like my relationship with her. I mean, there's still days, guys, I get up now, and there's been times during this journey that, I mean, I've gone through a lot of chemotherapy, and it's not fun. You lose a lot more weight than you would on Jenny Craig, but it's a lot more expensive.
You wouldn't recommend it as a weight loss program, huh?
No, I mean, we're 1.2 million into medical bills right now, so I don't recommend it. But
tell them what you told, or what you and Carri talked about. You asked her the question about your relationship with God is, would you be willing to go through this?
Yeah, I mean, there have been, there's been times that just his presence has just been there. And I've gotten up and there's been days that I said, I'm not talking to you today. I have. Lord, I am not talking to you today. I'm mad. And, and he's always been there.
Yeah.
But here about 6 weeks ago, it was when I first started getting some strength back and feeling better. And we both had talked about what it had done for our individual relationships with the Lord. And I asked her the question, I said, if we had to fight this fight the rest of our lives, but it meant that we stayed in pursuit of God, would you be willing to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, Pastor, it's probably been one of my biggest, I'll use the word fear. I'm not afraid of relapse. It's an odd in leukemia battles. I'll go home if I relapse. One of my biggest fears is feeling better and life getting back to normal and me forgetting the closeness that I've walked in for the last 8.5 months with God.
You're making me cry, Doug. Dang it. It's good.
It has so changed who I am as a person. And there are still days that I get up, that those old filters that I was raised with, that I feel like, I was telling Pastor backstage a while ago, the Lord spoke to me one day while I was brushing my teeth, of all places. But he said, you don't know how to just be loved without feeling like you have to do something in return. And I still find myself in that trap some days trying to figure out, what do I got to do to please God? What do I got to do? What do I got to do? I tell you what I have to do. I have to go back to the scriptures for that, just the same as I have for my healing for the last 8.5 months.
That's good, yeah.
The Doug translations of Galatians, where the Apostle Paul said, are you so stupid to think that you started this journey in the Spirit that you're now going to perfect it in your flesh?
Yeah, it's really good. It's really good.
I'm sorry, that's how my Bible reads to me in my brain, so pray for her. This is what she lives with, so. And the same God of grace that paid for my salvation. I didn't earn it. Go read Ephesians 2. There's not a stinking thing that I did to deserve that. Nothing that I can do to earn it. It was the same work on that cross that paid for my healing. And one of the things that her and I have come to have to settle is outcome is his department. Trust is ours. For me to sit around and worry, what if, what about? And in this battle, everything is about numbers. What's your white blood cell count? What's your neutrophil count? Where are your platelets? I have blood draws every week. I've given enough blood in the last 8.5 months to fill a swimming pool. But at the end of the day, it's about trusting him.
No matter what your battle is, this has been ours. Yours can be something else. It could be your finances, your family, your kids, your job, anything. It doesn't have to look like this, but everything that we say applies to your situation also. Get your support group, get your scriptures, hang them on the wall, hang them in your car. Yeah. We had them all over the hospital room. I couldn't tell you how many doctors, and a lot of them are from other countries and you know that Christianity was not their background would stop and look at the scriptures. They happened to be on pictures, but I didn't care that it was the pictures that got their attention. They all stopped and they all read all the scriptures once they realized they were all around the room. So, you know, if that's what it takes, you do it too. Do it in your car, do it in your bathroom, your office, wherever, you know, wherever it is that you spend your time, and that you're going to see that. And if it gives you the ability to get to speak to somebody else about it, that's kind of a plus. That's that extra little benefit.
So what do you want to do, Doug? We're winding down on our time, and I know that's an odd thing for a pastor to ask a non-pastor, but what do you want to do? How do you want to close? What do you want to say to all of us tonight that may or may not be going through anything? Maybe we're not going through anything, but maybe what those people need to hear is we're in such a fast pace that maybe we're missing out on one of the greatest blessings this world has to offer. Is when we slow down our pace is when we notice God. Maybe somebody in the room is going through hell and they need some sort of an encouragement. So you can say something, you can pray, if I'm putting you on the spot, like you're not a pastor, you're doing an altar call, go for it, man. I don't know what you want to do.
I think the most important thing to me out of this has been just what I was saying about the closeness and the trustworthiness and the faithfulness that God has shown to us. This journey hasn't looked anything like what I thought it would. Nothing. And it doesn't really matter what your background is. If you grew up in church and you're jaded and cynical, and I know I've got some friends that are watching live stream tonight. Maybe you don't have a relationship with God. I would say mine was really probably surface at best before this. But maybe you haven't experienced this, or maybe you grew up in church and you've learned to put on the church mask and come in here and you know the expectations. Okay, this is a slow song. I'm supposed to raise my hands here. But you've never really met Jesus. If you hadn't figured out, my wiring's a little different, and I'm sure chemo hasn't helped that. I'm not going to do the eyes closed, bow your head, all of that thing. I'm just going to simply say, He is the greatest gift that has ever been given to us.
Yeah.
And if you've never met Jesus, or you are doing the game that I did, trying to figure out how to earn your way into His favor, come down here. Just get off your rear end and come down here.
I love it.
I can't believe you actually gave me a microphone. But
I love it. No, I love it.
I'm going to assume, since nobody's coming down, that we all have that level of relationship with the Lord. But the other thing, like what my honey was saying, we'd like to pray with you guys. we've got a whiteboard in our kitchen now. We have people that reach out to us on Facebook or text. It's full of people that happen to be fighting cancer. But your journey is your journey. It's not any less significant.
Yeah.
Just because we're in a battle with leukemia doesn't matter. So if you would like us to pray with you or for you, same thing. Just stand up and come down here. We'll be glad to pray. Come on. There's got to be somebody in this room that wants prayer for something.
It's going through something. Here they come.
I mean, let's not play the church game of I'm going to wait for somebody else. If you need prayer, come. I'll check that one. I know you're probably going to put me in timeout for this.
It's another knot to untie.
First of all, I want to honor you. I would not have made it through this fight without you. So I honor you for that. You don't have to pray on the microphone if you don't want to. But I've heard some of the prayers that you've prayed over me in the last several months. I want you to pray for these guys, not me.
You start and he'll finish.
Done it for so many. You've done it for us time and time again. People into our lives at just the right moment, just the right words, just the right time to give us a hug. And you have all those people available and waiting for all these people that are here, that are hurting, that need something from you. And I know that you will do it for everybody. We just have to learn to wait. Have a get on a cold day. I think that right now tonight, that's beginning, and the start of that is going to happen for each and every person that stands here tonight. In your name, I pray and I thank you. Amen.
Father, your word says that you sent your word, and your word healed us and delivered us from our destruction. Father, your word says in Psalms 103, bless the Lord, O my soul. forget not all of his benefits, for he forgives all of my sin, and he heals all of my diseases. God, your word says in Psalms 91, 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. But Father, more than anything, just like we sang tonight, God, you have chosen to deposit your glory in jars of clay. Father, we are so honored to be called your kids. Father, to have your unconditional love for us that we don't have to earn. God, but we simply have to receive. So, Father, just like Pastor taught us on Sunday, we bless you for what you've done for us. We thank you for what you're doing for us right now. God, and it may not look like what we think it's going to look like, but we praise you for what you're doing for us in the future. Father, we truly are honored to be able to gather in your name. In Jesus' name.
Thank you for joining us for today's message here at Victory Church, where we are called to equip people to live in his presence, move beyond ourselves, and be transformed. That only happens through your radical generosity, your serving, and your prayers. If this ministry has impacted you in any way, we invite you to partner with us in giving towards this ministry. You can do that by visiting our website, victory.church/give, or you can download our Victory Church app and select Give there. Thank you again, and have a blessed day.